All right, everybody, this is Alex, the captain from the College Sports Connection podcast. This week, bringing you a new episode, something a little bit different, talking about some of the stuff going on here in the country. Today, I'm bringing on special guest and great personal friend, Frankie Brun from not only the Culver Military Academy, but newly appointed head coach at Friends University as the head track and field coach. So, Frankie, it's an honor to get to talk to you about some of the stuff that's going on in the country.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm really excited to chat with you and catch up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So everybody knows kind of what's been going on the last 2 weeks now, I think is what it's been. But really, I think you'd be willing to agree with me, it's something that's been going on for hundreds of years. We're just seeing it so much more prevalent thanks to outlets like social media. I guess kind of what's your take on what's going on, and what are you seeing and that you're feeling, I guess, inspired by?
Yeah, I think I personally, being an African-American male and kind of understanding a lot of the frustrations and struggles that African-Americans have kind of gone through in my generation, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, it is frustrating to see that these things still exist. It's frustrating to see that, there are people who are speaking up, but then action isn't really happening. In certain areas of the country. I will say that it's not the entire country that is going to be in extreme peril. There are pockets of the country where there are people who are really banding together to build unity across race, gender, sexual orientation. And that's been a beautiful thing as of recent, being able to see some of that. But it's been really frustrating. It really hits home to see just the struggle that a lot of people are having. And it's really unfortunate to see that peaceful protest is being combated with abuse by some police officers. There are some police officers who are deciding to step down in the police force altogether because they don't align with what some of the moral and ethical just demands or standards that some police departments have. And so, for me, I'm just really hoping that this is a good time for our country to really band together and kind of have a voice for this, and that we can actually make some change. I think one of the positive things that I noticed in this whole experience, because I know that when you look at social media, like you mentioned, there's a lot of negative press out there right now.
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
hate press out there right now. And I know that for me personally, it took me a while to be able to make a public statement on what it is that I felt about it, just because I saw so much negative press, and it initially, gets you aggravated and angry and upset about it. But there is some positive out of this situation. You're seeing something that, quite honestly, in my lifetime, I haven't seen. And there are people who, in an older generation, my parents' generation, haven't seen either. And that's seeing the unity between white Americans and Black Americans, and white Americans understanding that they don't fully understand the situation, but they're open to the educational component of it. How can I stand by you? How can you educate me so that I can lift you up and support you like I lift up and support everyone else? And that's something that, quite honestly, has not really happened in the past. So I'm excited to see what things are going to come of this. Obviously, from the higher ups, you look at the White House, it goes back and forth on what people are seeing and their frustrations with it. And, that's a whole nother, conversation to be had. But,
Right.
It's going to be a turning point right now in our country on what we're doing here to have race equality. There are people who are asking for extreme things. There are people who are suggesting things that need to be put into place to support African-American families and African-Americans just in general across the country. And, I think some of them are justified. And so it's interesting just to see what's happening right now. I mean, in my world in college athletics, this is where we, from a college standpoint, really need to stand up and stand with this movement. Because, I did a little bit of, digging just to figure out the percentages on African Americans. You talk about, I love your podcast because you talk to a lot of coaches that aren't always primarily football and basketball. And you try to promote that, and understanding that all sports should be created equal as well.
Absolutely.
And I get it that these are revenue generating sports. So even if I just take them as a statistic, in the NCAA, 46.9% of football players are Black. 58.9% of basketball players are Black.
Mhm.
yet we're having these types of situations where there's not equality. And so it's really frustrating to see some of that. And for us, we really need to take a stand in supporting our students,
Sure.
because this is where they're going to learn their voice. College is where you learn that. And, when you sign up to be a college coach, it's developing an athlete, it's developing a student, but it's also developing a man or woman to be the moral and ethical being they want to be when they graduate in this society.
Sure.
So, this is a really important time for college coaches. It really is.
Yeah, I think you bring up the interesting point about, with the college coaches and colleges as a whole having to kind of unite on that front. I think at least I have, and I know AJ has as well. Unfortunately, my co-host wasn't able to be with us tonight, but we've kind of noticed that it's an effect. We'll see a college like sports team say something before some of the universities will say something, before even some of the conferences will say something. And so I'm just kind of noticing this, and sure, I get some of it's how do we word this so that it's politically correct and appropriate, whatever. But I think it's so interesting. You mentioned basketball, 58% African American players. Those are the ones that I've seen first that have posted their statements.
Right.
And I think that really shows you, at least in my eyes, I think it shows the commitment and the understanding these coaches and those teams have towards this movement. And they recognize this is bigger than, at the end of the day, we go back to our dorm and, we order a pizza. Like this is about my brother and sister who I'm fighting with every single day to bring equality to the face of this country.
Right. Absolutely. And I really love the fact that people are stepping up all over. Athletes are, coaches
Mhm.
are. And it's interesting you mentioned just what is the domino effect, or what is the chain of command when it comes to
Right.
putting out a statement. And in some places it comes from the top, right? The
Mhm.
CEO is putting something out there. In other places, the president of a university is saying nothing, but every single sporting team out there is putting some type of statement out there, standing in solidarity with the African American community. And I think, from even just my experiences of where I've coached, a lot of private schools, predominantly Caucasian board members, presidents, professors, coaches. My prior coaching job at Benedictine College, for example, I was the first African American head coach they had ever had in their school history. They were
Wow.
founded in 1858, and I was hired in 2015. So
Mm.
some of these places have a long way to go. It's not like they aren't willing to be able to do that, but when they're not making statements, I think what people are misunderstanding sometimes is that the lack of making a statement isn't so much that they're ignorant and they don't care, but they're
Sure.
being cautious and they're trying to figure out the right way to be able to say that.
Mhm.
There are some presidents of institutions who've put out some statements regarding their lack of knowledge of just systemic racism and them wanting to understand it more. And I
Mhm.
appreciate those sincere, genuine letters that are going out into the public.
Sure.
There are some of them that were, just jumping on the bandwagon a little bit, and they come off a little disingenuous, and
Mhm.
that's okay. But people can read through that. And
Yeah.
so it's tough because there's a balancing act of who speaks up and how do you speak up. And, people are asking a lot of, African American people of color to speak up about their instances of inequality, thinking that
Mhm.
that's going to educate. It does to a certain degree because it brings light to the situation, but it's doing more harm than it is doing help in a lot of
Sure.
situations because people are just getting more angry. So we've got
Mhm.
to find some more constructive ways to be able to put this situation out there and discuss it more proactively. You know,
Sure.
right now we're very reactive because there's
Mhm.
rioting and there's looting, and we're trying to figure out how do we get it to stop. So we're going to have to figure out how to flip the script a little bit, and there's going to have to be unity somewhere. There's going to have to be a voice somewhere from some sector of the country where we can start working constructively on what the solution can be.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important. I've talked to, I have several members of the African American community that I'm really close friends with. I mean, you one example, but I've talked to some of those around here, even in the Toledo area. And because I know that I recognize I'm privileged just because of my skin color. I may not be the richest, but I have the opportunity to have a voice that can kind of inspire other people solely because of the fact that I was a Caucasian male, born a Caucasian male. And I recognize that, but I also recognize that unless I use that voice for empowerment, it's just another voice that, I think really the line in the sand is, at this point, you either recognize the movement and you understand this is a real thing that needs to happen, or you look at it and you're like, well, it's not affecting me. Why should I worry about it? And I think that's the wrong mindset, 100%.
Absolutely. And that's quite honestly the mindset that a lot of people take on different things outside of what racism is. You look at socioeconomical statuses and poor people versus rich people. And, if you take a simple example, right? You live in an apartment complex and you got rain coming through your roof. So you got a leak. Now you go to the front office and you tell them, and we'll send somebody out, and then maybe 3-4 days before someone comes out.
Sure. And
you become frustrated, but until that person at the front desk has a leak in their roof and they've got the same situation going on, it may not really matter to them. And that's kind of how everyone's taking an approach for a lot of things just in general, but this is something that we really can't, just because, like I said, the stats don't lie when it comes to just the involvement in the communities and different careers and sectors like that. I know that African Americans make up less than 20% of what the United States population is, but they are involved in every sector of, careers
100%.
in the United States. So it's something that we do need to address regardless of the percentage. And with that even being said, it's just putting an emphasis on increasing those percentages so that this becomes more of an issue that we address on a regular basis. You take, again, sports. I love the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule with the NFL, it's something where if you're going to be out there and you're looking for a head coach and you need to, interview 2 African Americans, in this search along with the other candidates that you're doing, it sets a precedent of saying we need to actively go out there and find people of color who can lead a league that in the NFL, 65% of the athletes in the NFL are black. So if you need to be able to put those things in place. And so I think that a lot of institutions need to start looking at some of those things. I know that within the last 5 to 10 years, quite a few colleges and universities, in an effort to increase diversity, have added full-time diversity and inclusion chairs, and those people who are, there every single day trying to build a community that's more diverse on campus. It helps to a certain degree. I know some institutions, they add that as a role, but then they just slap it as another responsibility onto somebody who's already a full-time person. So it becomes, a role that they don't really see as that important. It's just some extra duty. There need to be these types of initiatives to get people of color into colleges, get them into professional careers, and to kind of have a presence wherever it is that we're going in the country, a bigger presence than we currently have.
Sure. And I think that's one of the big things that I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle right now is diversifying those, especially in the sports world, since I know that's going to be kind of the focal point of our discussion today. I think diversifying the staffing to match the players. I think you see so often, and I'm sure I'm going to upset somebody with this. So often you see this old white rich guys club, and they just sit there and they handpick. All right, well, I know him because he's Jim's son, so yeah, we'll bring him on. But they don't look at their qualifications. It's an old boys club, and I feel like a lot of times there are so many quality candidates within people of color that they pass over just because they're not part of that club. And I think that's a problem that's been going on for, again, centuries, but it's become more prevalent as these sports leagues, these owners are getting older, they're dying. So now they're leaving these teams to their family. Like, Jerry Jones, his son runs the Dallas Cowboys. Robert Kraft, he's old, his whole staff, that they're all white, and I think that that's so critical that we look, not only as people on the front lines, the scrubs, I guess, if you will. But I think it's so important that we kind of push that momentum forward to these owners. These say, look, we're not going to support your product if you don't make it consumable for literally everybody.
Right. And I think a perfect example is that is what Adam Silver's doing in the NBA. I mean, he has him and David Stern, obviously the last two commissioners, past and present, have really revolutionized this one entity of professional sports and be able to give, minority athletes a voice. And it's amazing to see just the voices that exist in the NBA. It's amazing to see, the situation that happened in the Clippers a handful of years ago with, Sterling being the owner of them, but, being an inherent racist person, and them realizing then the athletes and the coaching staff standing up and saying, we're not going to stand for this. And the NBA doing something about that. And, them even going as far as the gender gap of women not being represented in professional sports and hiring women as assistant coaches and G League coaches. And so I think they're on the right path with that. The NCAA, NAIA, even the junior college ranks got a long way to go, just because you look at the professional sporting ranks and those people are lifers. They've been doing this a long time. And where did they start? In college. And so if it is that, college wants to change, they're going to have to change the way that they view hiring people with potential. Because like you had mentioned, a lot of the hiring is, either you're a son or a nephew or something, you have some lineage as far as a coaching experience and they kind of take your word for it, or you were a really good athlete and that doesn't always translate to being a great coach, but you're a really good athlete and we're going to put you on our team because it actually helps from a marketing standpoint to recruit high caliber people.
See John Elway with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah. That's, I'm not a Broncos fan, but I feel bad for the people that are, because it's going to be a while for them to kind of get to where they need to get to. But it's going to be an interesting future on how do you diversify the college ranks. I mean, for me, I've been coaching college track and field for 8 years now, started as a voluntary coach in a predominantly white institution, in a predominantly white city, with a team of all Caucasian athletes, and had to tell myself I had to figure out how to build a connection with these kids in order to get the results that we needed for me to kind of move forward. And, it's a heavy burden for current African-American head coaches, knowing that we have pretty much a one-strike policy. I mean, it's not like everyone's out doing terrible things in the world, but people make mistakes. Coaches make mistakes just as athletes make mistakes. And with African-American coaches, it tends to be a one-strike policy. You make a mistake, whatever it is going on in your personal life, whatever it is, it may be misconstrued the wrong way professionally, and then that's it. You are now on a coaching exile. You are no longer going to be able to get a coaching opportunity. And so now you're looking for a different career field. So, I take great responsibility in knowing that what I'm doing is paving the way for a lot more African-American coaches to go out in any sport and be successful. And it's, for me, making sure I'm recruiting a diverse amount of athletes, types of athletes, whether it's socio-economical, whether you can pay a full ride out of your pocket, or I've got to give you a full ride scholarship to be here. Obviously the racial diversity with track and field. I mean, it's a predominantly black sport. However, I live in Kansas. Kansas is a predominantly white state. And so it's bringing some diversity to Wichita. That's one of the things I'm tasked with right now this spring. We needed to diversify what our team looked like. I went out in our incoming class of about 40 athletes this fall. I would say 50% of them are African-American from somewhere in the country, which is going to take our program a huge step forward and bringing some culture to our team. Sure. And then it even comes down to the coaching staff. We had some openings, and I went out and I specifically said I want a female on my staff and I want a female who's a person of color. So I went out and looked at some different candidates and found a female who was an excellent sprinter at the D2 level and is coming to our institution this fall, who's going to be a huge mentor and leader for our team, and specifically for the women on our team to move forward. And so it's giving those opportunities, but with also giving those opportunities, Black people got to understand that if you're going to be given these opportunities, unfortunately, there is a heavier burden on your shoulder to bear. You must go out there and you've got to put on your A game. You know, if there is a dress code, you better dress the part. If there is recruiting standards, you better understand how do we verbalize ourselves in a way that we can go out and articulate what our program is about and what we're trying to do in order to better ourselves. And we have to take the initiative for professional development. I get it that there's going to be struggles along the way because systemically you're going to get pushback anytime that you want to progress. But we have to continue to keep pushing regardless of those, obstacles that we're going to have. And it can be done. It absolutely can be done. And it's just us banding together like we are now. The white community is standing by us for the most part in different areas of the country. People are taking a turn and understanding what that's about. And so it's going to be really exciting just to see what kind of change is going to happen. I will say, as cliche it is, it's darkest before the dawn. So as all the craziness is going on with the looting and rioting and the continued peaceful protests in literally every city in every state of the country, they will continue. It will continue until some change is made, some things are put into place that will help unify our country even more.
Sure. No, I think, and you mentioned just a minute ago about the African-American coaches kind of needing or getting a one stripe policy, if you will. I kind of makes me think of that movie, Remember the Titans, where Coach Boone, the board was like, he loses one game, he's out. But, you had coaches for years who have had losing seasons or, whatever. And that blows my mind that, you're going to give a guy one mistake. That's it. And I can't wrap my head around that because I'm a person who I've made a few mistakes in my life. I think, you mentioned we all have, we're human and we're not perfect, but I know that I've been afforded more opportunities to correct those mistakes than maybe somebody in a similar situation of color may have. And I guess for me, my question is, how do we combat that? Obviously all of this is going to die down at some point. I think we recognize that. I don't think it should until, like you said, real change happens, but it's going to die down. We're going to see, something else is going to take the national headlines and this will get pushed to the back burner. It happens every time. How do we continue moving this movement forward proactively and, peacefully, not peacefully, however people, I'm not here to judge. That's not my job. But how do we continue to move this forward so that we can make sure that we're diversifying appropriately, but also respectfully? I think that's the other part. I feel like sometimes people do it just to, oh, hey, well, we have our people of color. We're good now. We met the quota. How do we do that respectfully so that we recognize the intrinsic value that everybody can bring to a program or to whatever?
Right. I think a lot of it's going to come down to just influencers who are going to be of African-American, descent. Like you
Sure.
need Black influencers to step up and speak. There has to be some type of unified front when it comes to that. And it's going to take them and some other people who are maybe the generation before us or the generation before that, who will band together with our generation to be able to do something about it. Because I think it's interesting to see that our generation of people, our age, people can stand up for just about anything. Think about 50 years ago, that could not happen. It couldn't happen for women. It could not happen for Black people. It could not happen for, Jewish people. It could not happen for a lot of different people. And now people feel a lot more comfortable in this day and age with doing that. So it's reaching back to some people that felt like they didn't have a voice before and unifying them with us. And I think that's what's going to move us forward, is putting those two things together. And I see the inklings of it happening, here and there. We talk about how do we do that, right? I'm associated. You talk about Culver Military Academy. I'm a Culver Military Academy graduate, and they have a summer program there, and I've been working there every summer since 2005. Right. And so I'm deeply rooted in that institution. That institution does lack diversity. It lacks Black presence in the faculty and the staff and the students and the campers in the summer. And So it's putting together some organizations within the Black community who are alum and current students and parents who can say, what can we do to stand up to our institution, explain to them we need to acknowledge this is something systemically that we have not been doing well, which is perfectly fine to acknowledge as long as we're willing to make change. And then we're going to put some proactive things in place in order to make change. Does that mean that we fundraise dollars to put together scholarship funds for African American students to be able to get that experience to go to a private institution? Absolutely. That's a starting point. You know, do we put someone in the admissions department that's going to help actively recruit students of color all over the country who are qualified to be able to go to this institution? Absolutely, we can do that as well. I think where it really starts is a place like maybe the board at an institution like that, and adding some diversity to the board. I mean, the diversity on the board at Culver Educational Foundation, there's one African American on the whole board. So that's maybe a starting point as well, or give a percentage of the board slots for diverse people, knowing that it is a diverse institution with having people come from international places, different countries all over the world, and even just different races within the country itself. If people go to the school, you know, make slots for these people to be heard. And it's going to have to go all the way across the board for some things like that to happen. There are some places that won't survive this. It's just like COVID-19. There are some institutions, some companies, some people's thought processes that will not survive a pandemic, just like it will not survive racial inequality. It's not going to happen for some people. They need, and they need to come to that realization. And this movement now is trying to get people on board. It's not so much of a retaliation or retaliatory type of movement as much as it is get on the bus or you won't have anywhere to go after we continue to move forward. So there's some ways that this can definitely happen. And I think that our generation of people who are willing to stand up for what they believe in, whether it's, equal rights for races, whether it's gender equality, sexual orientation equality, whatever those things are, we've done an amazing job over the last few years of bringing awareness to a lot of different things that are important to this country, which makes our country so amazing. And this is just the next step in that process. It's a huge step for us, but it is the next step that we're facing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, this country, I think more so than most, we get the opportunity to, affect change far more than, some other countries. So like in that one hand, we are very, very blessed as a country, but I think now it's, really continuing to push that change forward. I think, again, like I mentioned, we see these things die out so quickly because we got social media. The next big thing takes over and this gets put to the back burner and we don't see anything about it again until, unfortunately, the next, victim in an unfortunate situation. Right. And, I think what does also help, though, as much as I think social media is kind of a dark mark on the US, I think it's also so beneficial for us to finally get to see with our own eyes a lot of these injustices that are taking place in our own neighborhoods. Right. I think the one thing I saw, the Buffalo police just this week, that horrible incident, where the 2 officers were fired, but now you saw, I think it was 57 officers quit the force and applauded the guys as they were being discharged. And to me, that just, I don't understand the thought process. Like, you would rather leave than to help affect positive change to make your department look better. I want to be very, very clear here. I 100% respect, our law enforcement officers, and I'm so thankful that we have them when we need to call on them. But I think that there's so many issues with the way that system works. I think there's a lot of, I saw something on I want to say Twitter or Facebook the other day, and I think it's so true. Some of those law enforcement officers, they really took the time. They went and got their law degree or their criminal justice degrees, and they really, really looked at how the system works. Others, they go through 8 weeks of training to be, a deputy or, to be, part of the police force, whatever. And I think that there needs to be a standardized change. Right. One, I think that's where it starts. The people in power are the one who have to make that change first. And I think social media is kind of giving people not in power the platform to say, look, this is what's going on. Now the FBI is investigating the death of her name slips me. I apologize. The young lady who passed away, or who was, I believe she was killed this last week. The FBI is now investigating that because of the social media push. So again, I think, it's a positive thing, but also a very negative thing. And it's sifting through that to find the truth. At least that's what I've come to expect.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the whole police force and the education that goes behind that. I mean, I'm a military vet, and, my family is a military family, and I went to a military academy. And when you take that as context, you look at the police force, you look at military police. The training for police force, you said, is 8 weeks. In order to be military police for the United States Air Force, you're going to go through about 8 weeks to 10 weeks of basic training. And then you're going to have several months of generalized tech school. And that's across the board with every branch of the military. There is not one entity out there where the training period is going to be 8 weeks, but then you're going to be able to go out there and be, an enforcer per se, within the community. So I think there's going to be some reform for sure on the police side of things. And I think maybe some education. I mean, on my end, what I'm really pushing for everybody in this instance is education. Education. How can we educate? I know that a lot of these things systemically, when you look at systemic racism that's there's people who are inherently racist and don't realize that they're racist just because of the communities that they've grown up in, and the geographical areas that they've grown up in and the exposure to diversity that they've never had. And so they're just, regurgitating the same old stuff that, their parents learned, their grandparents learned because they stayed in that community. And so I think a big thing for our country right now is education. You asked about what do you think is going to help unify our country? I think one thing that can be on the lookout for is the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. If anything bands the world together over any type of issue, or as a platform for change, it's going to be the Olympics. You take track and field, for example. You look at Jesse Owens in the 36 Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that story. Yep. And it affected our country dramatically and affected world change dramatically. You look at the 68 Olympics, and you think about John Carlos and Tommy Smith, that picture on the podium of the 200-meter dash where both of them have their fist up. And you've got the Australian silver medalist who's standing there with them, and he didn't put his fist up, but he stood there in solidarity with them, and his career ended after that. The Australian, Athletic Federation pretty much crucified him, and that was it. His career was over basically because of that. So there are things that happen at the Olympic Games, and that's just a couple track experiences. I'm a track head, and I know the history of what that looks like in track and field. But then you look to the future of what is this next Olympics going to do for our country, and what is it going to do for the world to unify once again? I mean, I liked seeing a peaceful protest in Belgium that happened last week in solidarity for change for the United States. You're seeing it in other countries, and I think that those types of things are huge for us. We're in an election year. I don't like to get into a ton of politics, but I know that that's going to have an effect on what our country is going to look like. But when you start looking at June and July and August of 2021, I think you're going to start seeing some unity within our country, and you're going to see some unity between countries that is going to affect positive change for us. So for me, that's what I'm looking forward to, because the Olympics, obviously I work in the world of sports and it affects us directly, but it indirectly and directly affects every single person in this country, because we have a sense of pride when we're sending people to the Olympic Games to represent us in all these different sports. And so I think that's going to be something positive for us moving forward. But there are some things that need to happen. We're growing. We're continuing to grow as a country. And with growth comes struggles, the growing pains. And we just can't be remedial. We cannot take steps backwards. I talk to my athletes all the time about success. And I say success is not linear. It's not the path of least resistance. In our minds, that's how we map it out. But as long as you know that you are facing the goal, as long as your back doesn't turn to the goal at any point in time, you're going to make your way to that goal. And if we keep that in mind, that success is not linear, but we need to continue to take steps forward, whether it's one step or a half side step, whatever that is, we're moving forward. So the big thing that we need to do is keep our minds on being forward and being unified and educating. How do we educate our country? You know, we aren't going to be able to get white people to fully understand, you know, how this oppression for centuries has really affected the Black community in America. But what we can do is educate them on that. They can sympathize with us because they cannot empathize. They have not experienced it themselves. But from that moving forward, we can join together and make some change and move forward. Now, I'm excited about that, but we need to figure out how are we going to educate. Right now, we're in such hurt that we're not doing much education right now. You know, we're trying, we're in those beginning stages, but that's the next step, is educating and then making some demands on just diversifying our workforce, diversifying our schools, diversifying our who represents what in this country.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. Personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing the NFL's response. I mean, you know this, I'm a big football guy. And I'm really interested to see how the NFL responds now that Roger Goodell has come out and said we were wrong about protest. We want to stand with that. I want to see if it's words or if there's going to be definitive action, because I know that, and again, we won't get into politics, but there are politicians out there who fully support it. There are politicians who disagree with it, think, at work, that's not the time to protest. There's two sides to that story. Right. So I'm really excited to see if Roger Goodell is going to take a stand and if he is going to force owners to allow their players to protest if they so desire, as long as it's peaceful, not just, whatever it is. Right. So, sure, there has to be contingencies in place. I think that's a given. They can't be, running through the stadium, like ripping things, like it has to be, respectful. And I think now Roger Goodell, I don't want to say he gets it, but I think he recognizes where the country's at this point. Just like you said, we're at a turning point, and it's either unify or continue to divide. I feel like a lot of the things that I've been seeing, and I know other people that I've talked to have said this as well, feel like we see aspects of the country set back 50 years. And that kind of terrifies me, knowing how much progress we've made just to see it all get rolled back that quickly. And maybe it's been hidden. Maybe it's been, again, I think social media brings a lot more of it to the forefront, but I think that it's just absolutely terrifying to see literal decades destroyed in just a couple of years. And that's heartbreaking.
Right. But I think that, you talk about the NFL and like what's their response going to be as far as protesting and how they'll be able to do that. I think if he makes the right move, if Roger Goodell makes the right move on being able to set a contingency plan in place and saying players who want to protest can do A, B, C, and D, these particular actions will, result in a fine, and kind of steer it in a direction with him having some guidance from people who know what makes sense, obviously, which I think is going to be the hard part. I can see that Roger Goodell can put some guidelines in place on what protesting looks like. I firmly believe that it's going to be taken the wrong way, because as much as it seems like he is kind of hearing things, but I don't think he's listening. I don't think he does a really poor job of listening to people. He hears what people have to say, but he does a poor job of listening. And Black fans of the NFL and Black players in the NFL are very critical of Roger Goodell. So if it is that he takes the action of getting counsel from, people of color on what we can do to move forward on this, I think he's going to make the right move, and that can bring us together even more. And so we're going to see what that looks like. I think that in the near future, when it comes to sports, right, you see the NBA is about to start back up in July.
Yep.
And they're going to go through October with 22 teams out in Orlando.
Yeah.
I think, one, that's going to be great for people who are passionate about basketball or just sports in general, have something for them to watch. Also, it's going to be a huge platform for change. Just because no one's watching anything else. They've watched everything on Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max or whatever it is, streaming system that they've got. They've watched it all. Everyone's watched The Last Dance twice. So, they watched that 10-episode series twice through. They know everything about, the 90s and the Bulls. So this is something where people are going to be watching this, very intently on what's going on. So I think the NBA is going to be very intentional on how they show solidarity with racial inequality and those topics that are going on right now. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But there are some different things where there's opportunity to make change and to do the right thing that's going to put us in the right direction. So yeah, you can take a 50 steps backwards, if you will, if it is that, in this day and age, in 2020, 2021, you can make any progress you want if you put in the work. So yeah, we've made some strides backwards in this movement, which has led to this movement right now. And so we're going to have to reinvent the wheel a bit on how it is we're approaching racism in America and social equality. But I think that there are specific things we can do in the next 12 months that help us move forward. You take like 9/11, for example. You look at how devastating of a situation that is, terrorism on our own country, and thinking about how the state of New York, when Mayor Rudy Giuliani wasn't off his rocker and was a little more sane, he learned how to unify a city, which in turn unified a country, regardless of what our beliefs were. We wanted to stand together and say this was not going to be able to happen to us again, and that we're going to stand strong for one another. So there are some opportunities that are going to arise here moving forward as things start to continue to open up with this pandemic and sports start coming back. I think the NCAA season, whether it happens in the fall or not, I know by winter, I feel like things are going to kind of pick up again. That's going to be a perfect opportunity again for us to kind of stand with one another and move forward. And as much as sports seems like it's just this little entity of the American culture, it is a huge part of every American's culture. Everyone has a favorite team in some sport somewhere. Right. And if we are moving in that direction to have everyone unified, I think it's going to unify other people outside of sports. And sports is going to be that vice that helps us unify one another. Along the way, there will be some casualties of war. I will say that. And not war in a sense of an actual war, but there are going to be people who don't want to change. And it's going to be up to college and university presidents and professional sporting team owners and commissioners who are going to have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. If you have an owner that's not wanting to abide by the change that you're wanting to do, to make as far as including diversity and people of color in your coaching staff, or giving, athletes or students a platform, you're probably not going to make it in this career. And so I think there's going to be some changes there along the way in the next few months, but the positives are going to come. I mean, I definitely see what those things are. I'm a realist, but I'm an optimist. And I know that there are several things in place within the next 12 months that I think will really help us move forward. And capping that next year off with the 2021 Olympics, I think is going to be something that is going to be huge for our country. It's going to be huge for the world to be able to recover from a pandemic. And apparently Murder Hornets was, all of 30 days of something. Racial inequality in this country, if not other places, and just being able to continue to get through these growing pains as a country.
Sure. And I think for me, something that I observe, again, as somebody who recognizes that I come from privilege because of, my skin color, I see a lot of things within the diversity sector that I feel like there's so many times this movement is misconstrued as something it's not. And I don't want to assume you can agree with me on this, but I feel like we can at least have a candid conversation. I feel like there are people who are using this movement specifically for change. And then I feel like, and we see it on both sides, there are people who are using this movement as an opportunity for only themselves. Right. Whether that be the looters, whether that be, the police officers or other individuals abusing power or position. I feel like we're hitting that critical moment where all right, we need to figure out how to separate all the bad from it so that we can focus on that change. And I think that's the critical point I'm seeing. Like I mentioned here in Toledo, I've been seeing a lot of very peaceful protests, a lot of people just asking for change, asking for better. And you see that all over the country. The thing that that kind of, I don't want to say that makes me laugh, but it just kind of, I just look at it and I'm like, the hypocrisy, I guess, is what kills me. How many times do fans burn vehicles and do things after sporting events when a team loses or wins? I specifically remember the 2001 Ohio State or 2002 Ohio State Buckeye team. They beat Michigan 14-9. Their fans are celebrating out, they're flipping cars, burning couches, throwing couches out of dorms, burning these, like just everything. Columbus was absolute pandemonium, ripping goalposts down. But then now we're seeing, buildings getting, glass broken.
Yeah.
And it's, oh, well, those guys are thugs. It's like, your team won and you burned down half of your city. Like, I just, that blows my mind, is the hypocrisy there. It's just because it doesn't affect some people. So if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't exist, I think, is the mindset we see a lot.
Right. Or if I'm not behind the cause of the action, then it's bad. But if it is, I mean, you take the national championship. I remember when Maryland won the national championship in college basketball. And I was in Maryland at the time as a kid, and I remember everyone there was going crazy, and tearing everything up, and everybody was super excited that they had won, and people have to understand, I guess, with this particular movement and with the burning down of police, stations, or breaking into small businesses, looting, and all of that. There are two types of people that are out there doing it. One, there are people who are taking this opportunity to understand if people are going to loot, like you said, it's my own personal gain. I'm going to go out there whether I stand for whatever's going on or not. I'm looking at it objectively. I can break into this place and I can steal objects and items and have them. There are a lot of people out there who are doing that. Yes. Not saying that they're all of that, but there are people who are doing that. The other people who are out there looting and rioting are angry Black people, because you got to think, for centuries again, like, if the rules of the game are to play, if you're playing a game and here are the rules, but then you tell these specific players you don't get to play by those rules because, you use the Monopoly example. We're going to play Monopoly. Every time you pass go, I'm going to give you $200. Except for you, every time you pass go, you're not going to get $200. And how many times you pass go in that game? 15, 20, 25 times. Look how it disproportionately adds up. And at some point, they're frustrated to the point that this is how they make a statement of saying, something needs to change. And, I'm not saying that you take it out of context. Is breaking into a business and stealing those things and looting, the right thing to do, the moral and ethical thing to do? No, it's not. Right. You put it in the context of angry citizens who have had enough. It makes a statement. I'm not saying objectively this one thing is right or it's wrong, but you put it in the context, and it's a whole body of work. The peaceful protesting, the people who are out there rioting and who are out there looting and doing whatever. I'm not saying that those actions should be condoned, but it's a whole body of work of saying things need to change. There need to be some type of reform. There needs to be something that gives us an equal playing field. Even Black people who have similar jobs to white people are getting paid less than white people. More educated Black people are getting paid less than the same educated people who are white. And I mean, it's the same thing with women. And so it's really frustrating to see that is a reality. And so I'm hoping that within all of this, that there is some type of change. And quite honestly, it's going to have to happen, or else, people will continue to do peaceful protests. People will continue to protest. There's still going to be people who are going to go out there and riot. There's still going to be people who are going to test the limits. And as much of a quote unquote power move it is for police officers to resign, without less people in police force standing out there and standing guard for these places as peaceful protests are going on or rioting is going on, those are less people protecting these businesses. So it's only going to get worse. So, we're going to have to figure out what that middle ground looks like. I agree with you to a certain extent that it is a double standard on how we view rioting and lighting things on fire and destroying property, because people do it in celebration, people do it in anger. It's just an action that people do to make a statement. It's like putting an exclamation point at the end of a statement. And you win a
That's a great way
national
to
title.
describe that, actually.
What's that?
That's a great way to describe that,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, it's a perfect metaphor.
Yeah, it's the exclamation point at the end of a statement. When you win a national title, you're lighting everything up so that when they drive down the street, people are like, oh, man, something crazy must have happened here. Like, yeah, we won! Exclamation point. These people who are out here, they're screaming, we are oppressed. We've been oppressed. They keep saying it. Their voices have kind of been hushed. They get a little bit here. They get a little bit there. But it's not really making any change. And at this point in time, we're bursting the bubble. We are oppressed! Exclamation point. That's what that is. And so it's not so much the action itself, it's what does it signify? It's that exclamation point. Now that we know that that is what the statement is, that the country now knows, I know as a Black American, but now that everybody understands that is what it is, this is going to be a great opportunity for young people in our country to take a stand and do some certain things that really make some impact and change. I saw that there was a peaceful protest in the country, I can't remember specifically where it was, is organized by 3 Black junior high girls. They're the ones that put it together. And then knowing that if they can have a voice, anyone can have a voice. And so let's have the voice for change to move in the right direction.
Sure.
Sports is going to be that outlet. I mean, for me in my world with the NCAA, the NAIA, college athletics, I've got to stand behind my student athletes. I've got to let them know that I stand for what it is that they stand for. I stand for equality, and I'm going to stand with them through the thick and thin like I always do. And this is going to be a huge step for white athletic directors, white head coaches. One of the things I was talking about with one of my colleagues was the fact that in the world of athletics, you talk about basketball being a huge revenue generating sport that is predominantly coached by white coaches. And so they're going to have to make these statements to their African-American basketball players that they're recruiting all over the country. Do I stand with you or do I not? I just saw one of the top basketball recruits in the country signed with Alabama State University, historically Black college. That's extremely unheard of because HBCUs do not have, great athletic programs here and there across the country, especially with basketball. It's all Power 5 schools. Right. So to see some of that, there's going to be some things, the NCAA is going to be hurt by this if they don't make a statement, or people within the NCAA schools are not doing what needs to get done, especially in these money-making sports. You look at basketball and seeing that the G League is giving you an option now, where if the NBA is saying you have to take a year out of high school in order to go into the draft, some of these guys may just go overseas. Some of these guys might join the G League and get a paycheck for a year because that's developmental, or they might end up choosing to go to college, but at colleges like an HBCU and band together. And you look at examples like Zion Williamson getting 2 other guys in his recruiting class who are in the top 5 and say, yeah, let's all just go to Duke.
Yeah.
That's going to happen more and more and more in this country. Now, do you want it to be Duke? Are they going to say the right things? I'm not saying that Duke's not going to say the right things. Or is it going to be an Alabama State? Or, you look at a lot of HBCUs that are out there that have, basketball programs or football programs, and people are banding together to go there because of the message. Not so much because of the facilities or because of the coaches. It's going to become part of what the message is, because it's funny how college coaches right now, at least on the top end, some of them are developmental coaches, but some of them are just caretakers for 365 days until a person is eligible for the league, and then they will take all the accountability of developing that athlete, wherever it is that they go. I think one of the reasons why LeBron James didn't go to college is because I think he realized he's ready-made for the NBA, and it was going to stunt his professional development to be at a college, wherever it is that he may have chosen. That's not going to help him get any better. Right? If he wants to be the best athlete in the world, he's got to go be with the best coaches in the world to be able to do that. And so I think those are some options that are going to be happening out there in the world of sports. With college coaches are going to struggle with the recruitment of Black student athletes if they don't have the right message. So people need to just be educated so that they can have the right message and stand for that.
No, sure. And well, you mentioned college coaches and the recruiting aspect and, the caretaker aspect, all those different things that college coaches do. We just had Trisha Cullip on my show here a couple weeks or last week now. And she talked about her role is more than, all right, from this time to this time, we're in the gym. Her role is, I'm taking care of all of these athletes. If they need a tire changed at 10:30 at night on campus, I'm there because that's part of my family now. And I think you mentioned it's going to be a really interesting thing to kind of see that shift for these coaches to, are you going to continue to build a family culture, or are you just going to play that role of caretaker like you mentioned? And so I guess for you, obviously knowing you as long as I have, you play the role of, I want to see you at your very best 100% of the time. I don't see too many coaches like that, especially, and I want to be very careful here. I feel like at the Power Five level, especially with a sport like basketball, it's much less, let me develop you. It's much more, I know you're only here for a year, so I'm not going to waste my time.
Right. And it's sad because I think it taints the legacy of some coaches who for a long time were developmental coaches in the Power Five conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And then they see this turn. They see this new era of, the one and dones, and they want to stick to what they know, but they know that winning a championship is not feasible with that plan, or it's less feasible. I'm not going to say it's not feasible. You take a program, I live in Wichita, right? And so you take a program like Wichita State University. They are not a one and done type of institution. Coach Marshall over here does an incredible job of developing athletes, from bringing them in from all over the country, and developing them as a team to do well at the conference level at first, then to get to the national tournament and just work their way game by game through the national tournament. It wasn't so much, a title or bust type of situation, but then they made a name for themselves, put themselves on the map. And you even look at what they did this past spring, where they lost a lot of students to the transfer portal. And within like 2 to 3 weeks, they brought in 7 new athletes from all over the country who wanted to be a part of what this team culture was. It literally looked like complete chaos in the news. But a week later, everyone is singing the praises of Coach Marshall, and they're recruiting, and they got this JUCO transfer, and they got this other guy who transferred in, and they got this other freshman who signed. They know what they're doing. They find that right culture. So it's really sad to see in the world of sports, the one and done philosophy. And is winning a championship worth that? And I always think about that, when I'm recruiting. In the world of track and field, it's really tough to win a conference title. You're talking about 24 events during a track meet. There's 10 to 12 teams in every conference that you're in. So you're going to have some really heavy hitters in a lot of different areas in order to be successful and win a conference title. You can go find some really big-time guys who can come in, or girls who can come in here and sprint, jump, hurdle, win you a conference title, be All-Americans, place top 3, top 5 at the national meet. And then what you see, if the culture isn't built as a family dynamic where your coaches care about your personal growth, that program no longer exists. 2 years ago at the NAI Indoor National Meet, there was a team that I'll leave unnamed that finished top 3. And then this past indoor season, they only brought 2 representatives to the indoor track meet. And that speaks volumes to me on what kind of culture is going on there. Is the academic growth there? Is the personal growth there? Did these people transfer? Did they flunk out? Are they ineligible? What is their situation? Why are they not back at this meet? And so you're always trying to figure out, how do you develop that? And like you said, for me, I'm always looking at, how do I get the best out of you? If it is that the best for me is you being the 8th best guy at the conference meet in the 200-meter dash, you score 1 point for the team, then great. That's what we're going to get out of you. I'm not going to dismiss you because you're not the top 5% that we need, or you're not going to pad my resume as an All-American or a national champion. I want you to get an experience just like a guy who's going to come in and put in that hard work to be a All-American or a national champion. And so it fosters this culture of inclusiveness and unity, regardless of where it is that you're from. And you can continue to have success. But at what cost do you want to have that success? I've won several conference titles, in my career. I mean, we were conference champions. We were, our women's team was 6th at the indoor national meet this past year. We did an incredible job of banding together to do some different things to score enough points to stand up against the likes of, the Indiana Techs, who Indiana Tech is a monster powerhouse track program in the NAIA. You look at William Carey, they're the same way. And we were able to hold our own against some of these power teams. And a lot of that has to do with our culture, because we didn't have the firepower that they had. But we went out there and they knew that we were fighting for them just as much as they're fighting for us. They got on the line. They did exactly what they needed to do to represent. And there needs to be more developmental coaches at the higher level. I mean, it's really easy to recruit kids of color who are underprivileged with not a penny to their name when you offer them a full ride and a hope and a dream to be a pro athlete. And I'm not going to name names on D1 basketball coaches, but there's several of them out there that's their pitch. I've got you connected with agents who, when it's time, they're going to be able to talk to you. I've got you connected with people that are going to set you up for your family for the rest of your life. They're not talking about, the personal growth and, learning fiscal responsibility. If you're going to be a millionaire and you're going to come to my school, let us at least prepare you for what that looks like from an academic standpoint while you're playing basketball here.
Right.
A lot of that's not happening. And people are looking at, scholarship opportunities. There's so many Black students out there. And I follow a lot of kids on Twitter and Instagram through recruiting. And you see them, they're just stacking up offers because that's what they're clinging on to. They don't have much to their name. And if they've got an offer, they're about to let the world know they have an offer. And they want to have as many as possible so that they can make the best decision possible for themselves financially. And if you're going to give them that money to be there, the other side of that is there has to be some type of responsibility, ethical, moral responsibility from a coaching standpoint to develop those kids. Because it's really sad to see Black student athletes become a statistic because they're brought in due to their talents. They are not developed academically. They're not developed from a spiritual, emotional, moral, ethical growth perspective. And they're there to ball, whatever quote unquote ball means, whether you're on the football team, basketball team, hockey team, lacrosse team, track team. People want to win championships, and I get it. Like, that's what everyone covets. They want to get a ring. They want to get a ring, like call up a ring company and get one design and, let everyone know. But you've got to be able to understand that there's something much bigger than that. There, like in this little sector of college athletics, there's something so much bigger than that. We have to acknowledge that. That's what's going to help us improve in the college athletics of how we recruit and who we recruit. And, you're going to have less people, this transfer portal thing, you're going to have less people just jumping into the transfer portal. I'm glad it gives, athletes the ability to say, I'm not liking where I am, but they shouldn't have to come to that crossroads if they were sold the institution the proper way and they would have been able to read through that initially, it's probably not a right fit for me. I'm going to go to this place instead. I totally understand if you're a grad transfer, you got a year of eligibility, whatever, academically you did what you needed to do and you just want to go play another year. That's a whole different ballgame. But when you've got kids who are transferred from junior college, D2 school, NAIA school, they got one more year of eligibility. So a basketball team signs them up to play for them for 1 year. They know that they're there to play basketball. They know that they're not there to be a student. And that's where they start prioritizing athletics, and they're not understanding that they've got to develop themselves as an individual, a businessman or something after they're done with their athletic career. There's a shelf life on all of it. People look at, the LeBrons out there, and he's an anomaly. You look at Kobe, everyone loves Kobe. Kobe's an anomaly, and Kobe was set up to be able to be that successful with his father being a professional athlete, him living overseas. People don't understand that he understood 4 languages anyway. So he was an extremely intelligent guy and had a great support system that allowed him to grow, even though he went straight into the league out of high school. Like, people aren't staying in their professional field for 20-something years, as opposed to a normal career where 20 years is that mark. To say that I've done this career for 20 years, shelf life of an NFL player is like 3 years, 4 years, maybe.
Yeah.
You're even seeing more and more NFL players 7-8 years in. Who was that middle linebacker from
Luke Kuechly from Carolina. Yeah.
I've done what I needed to do. I'm not going to suffer the physical pain that I need to be relevant or whatever, his own personal reasons. Took his paycheck, retired, he's done. Andrew Luck, same deal. You're seeing more and more people being able to do that. The shelf life is going to be short for you as a professional athlete. So there has to be some education with athletes, particularly Black athletes, student athletes looking at colleges, where are they going? Why are they going there? And for me, that's what my calling is. I think that the bigger calling at the end of the day as a coach is that I want to make sure I'm educating them and their families on what it is that they're signing up for. What is this 4-year investment going to do for the next 40 years of your life? And if we can continue to do that, educate other coaches and athletic directors and athletic departments and that across the country, we're going to be better for it. If we can't, we're going to have a lot of angry Black students who are dropouts that have a lot of debt, and they're working minimum wage jobs because they didn't finish their education. So what the world needs, or not even the world, what our country really needs right now is just a heavy dose of education. Education for diversity, inclusiveness, education on social distancing, because some people don't really understand what that is either, even though, things are starting to open up. Just education in general. And so I always urge people, just educate. If you understand something and you have a better grasp on it than others, find the politically correct professional way to educate. Once all of this rioting and looting dies down in the streets with, Black people being very angry about oppression over the last couple hundred years, there's going to be a period that we need to be educating. And so as long as white people are listening and Black people are open to presenting this education in a professional manner, in a respectful manner to them, and I get it, there's still frustrations in it, but I can't hold you accountable for something that maybe your ancestors did. You know what I mean?
Right.
At the end of the day, you and I have a great friendship and a relationship for many, many, many years. And it's not, something that is solely dependent on what has happened 100 years ago. We decided to have a relationship with one another, to be friends and be colleagues and be acquaintances and realize that we have passions that correlate with one another. And so people need to start looking at it that way as well. And so there's some things that need to be put in place. I just urge a lot of different people to step out of their comfort zone and be able to educate, and people who don't understand, admit you don't understand, be open to listening, be open to be educated. Once you are educated, stand together in a unified front.
I think that fourth part that you mentioned is probably the most critical of the things that I've been seeing through social media and whatnot. It's, you talked about, recognizing you're not educated. It's the being open aspect that I think so often we see people, and I know that I'm guilty of this as well, and I fully admit it. And I was talking to somebody the other day about it. I don't understand how Black people are able to continue to fight this hard for this long. I'm exhausted doing what I can to try to educate others after 3 days. I can't imagine doing it for 25 years, So I think that's the part, is I think being willing to receive that education, being willing to see, hey, I'm not right. I need to understand this so that I can be right. I think that being willing to be open is such a critical aspect.
Yeah. It's human nature. People don't like to be constructively criticized. People don't accept criticism very easily. And so it's finding the different avenues that allow people to understand criticism and accept criticism. And, as a coach, you understand there's 5 different cues you can give to get one physical reaction. And, not all athletes are the same. Cookie cutter training doesn't work in most realms, so you apply that to like the sociological thing that's going on in the United States right now. And it's understanding that there's not going to be one way. This peaceful protesting and just protesting in general, it's going to affect a lot of people. However, there are some people who, as you can see through media out there, whether it's skewed or not, who are not affected by this whatsoever. They're like, they're thinking to themselves, okay, this isn't working. So, okay, great. Once we're done doing stage 1, which is all of this, what is the next step that's going to reach out to those people so that they can listen? What's their cue? And if we can continue to figure out what those cues are, we're going to be in a better place. And like you said, it is exhausting. It is tiring. When you're an African-American person, it's exhausting and tiring to think about where you need to be when, the hours of the day that you shouldn't be in what place, and the responses you should have to specific statements. And, did I do something wrong? Did I do something right? Like that becomes really, really exhausting. Even for someone like myself, I'm 32 years old and I'm already exhausted from it, But I know that change needs to happen, and I'm willing to continue to do it through my exhaustion to
Sure.
make sure that we get every cue out there that people can understand so that change can really happen. Because I think a lot of what's happening right now is that we're as a Black community, we're giving specific cues to the white community, and it's working to a certain extent. But there are different things that we're doing. The peaceful protesting is great, and that the country is doing it as a whole. I think it's reaching a lot more people than it ever has, which is what I talked about at the beginning of the podcast. It's so incredible to see what's happening right now in the country of unifying one another. There are also people who, quite frankly, do not care. This is something that it's not affecting them. This cue isn't working. So let's figure out what our next cue is. How do we empower ourselves to educate them, to get them to listen? And it's all about finding that cue. Some people may never listen, but we need to continue to push to make sure that we can all be on the same page and be unified on what it means to be socially and racially equal in every sense of the word. And, we're going to make the steps in the right direction. And I mean, it's Black people in the community who are willing to step up. It's white people in the community like yourself who are understanding and who want to be educated and who can make great alliances and friendships and relationships with the Black community. And then people know that you're standing with them. And we just need more of that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, all those points are, spot on. And I don't really know what else to say except, I guess, thank you. I picked up a lot in the last hour and 20 minutes we've been talking. I learned a lot just from this conversation on things that I don't see going on because I don't think about them, things that I'm not aware of because I don't have to think about them. So I guess, Frankie, thank you so much for, giving, time tonight to help educate myself and, obviously educate the listeners. I really appreciate it. And it means a lot that you would take the time to reach out to me and ask if we could work together. I was happy to do it.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you being able to allow us to have a conversation and put it on a platform where people can learn and be educated. And I will say, as much as, I have a knowledge of what this history looks like and systemic racism and this is how it applies to different things in my community and in the country as a whole and even globally, I'm still learning. I'm still learning on what some of those things are. People who are younger and have a specific view, they have to be able to say that they're open to learning as well, because I didn't experience what happened throughout civil rights movement. I was not alive then. So I can't say that I have that level of frustration and angry or anguish, because I did not live that. Who did? My parents lived that, grandparents lived that. And so understanding that we've all got to band together and continue to do that, and knowing that I'm always open to learning. People should always just be open to learning and educating themselves. That's what's going to make the world better. But I loved chatting with you. I really did. And,
Absolutely.
I will continue to listen to the podcast. I love how you are reaching out to people and digging in and kind of dissecting how they think. I like that it's a lot more than just the surface of how do you win, because winning is a byproduct, right? And you can talk to coaches who lose and they may have better moral and ethical philosophies and cultural philosophies. People are winning championships. So I love what you guys are doing on your podcast, and definitely going to support that and continue to listen. And hopefully we get to see each other soon.
I hope. Even if it's over Zoom, I'm fine with that. It's this whole thing has been nuts, and obviously I know we're both disappointed we won't be able to spend the summer together over at Lake Max and at Culver. But I know that now we're doing something that we can hopefully affect some change, even in some degree. And I appreciate you coming on and taking the time with us tonight. So thank you so much, Frankie.
Absolutely, man. Be safe.
Cool. Thanks, Frankie.
Yeah.